The Krion Conquest, or the Krion Conquest, or the Krion Conquest, whatever. Released in 1990 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, courtesy of Vic Fokkai and other assorted names, places you in control of a little witch girl named Francesca, who has been summoned by some other little girl to take on the evil forces of the Krion Empire and free the world from their vicious grasp. She can accomplish this task by using her magical powers to shoot fireballs and bouncy things, freeze enemies and hazards, create shields to deflect enemy shots, and summon her broom to navigate hazardous locales. The Krion Conquest, we'll just stick with that for now, is a side-scrolling platform game that bears a striking resemblance to that one game there. In fact, if there's one common criticism that I've heard over the years regarding this game, it's that it's often seen as a poor man's Mega Man, and indeed in some ways, this criticism does have some semblance of merit. Your main protagonist has animation style and bits that resembles Capcom's Blue Bomber, and the way you go about selecting weapons, magical powers in a weapons menu, as well as other graphical elements are certainly inspired by that other game series. And you know what? This wouldn't have been a bad thing if the Krion Conquest also bothered to copy one other key element from Mega Man that would have made this one a bit more worthwhile. But let's not dwell on that just yet. As I've said before, your witch has magical powers. You start each stage with your standard one-shot that can be charged up by holding the B button to fire a stronger shot, an ability that Capcom would give Mega Man in his 4th NES outing, so the stealing goes both ways. But you also have other abilities that are available from the get-go. Fire is the screen-clearing nuke weapon that kills all enemies on screen, or at least does significant damage to bosses at the cost of some life energy, so only use this when absolutely necessary, and try not to pick this one by accident because that's going to cause some problems afterwards. Freeze allows you to freeze enemies with a charged shot. Ball lets you shoot ricocheting shots that will bounce off solid terrain, useful for hitting targets at odd angles, or just some creative kills. Shield enables a barrier that deflects enemy shots as well as force enemies away. And finally, you have your broom. Summoning your broom serves two purposes. It can either be used as a temporary platform to reach a higher level, or it can, more likely, be used as a transportation vehicle, allowing you to navigate some rather hazardous terrain. Once you're on the broom, you shoot in the direction you want to fly in, and it'll move. So you could move left, right, or straight up since the witch can shoot upwards, something Mega Man could not do. However, what Mega Man could do was control his flying dog with relative ease, even if he wasn't given full control at times. The broom doesn't quite work that way. See, the broom, again, goes in any direction you shoot at, so it becomes very easy to forget this little factoid, shoot at an enemy while going one way and end up changing course by accident, which might lead to some less than favorable circumstances. The broom is also a rather sizable platform, which makes navigating narrow passages a rather tricky affair, as even the slightest tap on solid matter will make the broom disappear and drop you down someplace usually not very nice. Now, this could be considered a broken mechanic by some, but I'd prefer to call it an unpolished mechanic. And sadly, there are a lot of elements in the Krion Conquest that are decidedly unpolished. Control is the main culprit that hampers the Krion experience. Now, when it comes to walking around, that's fine. When it comes to firing your shots, that's also fine. When it comes to jumping, that's slightly fine. There are some lousy moments here and there, but it works fine for the most part. However, when you jump and then you fire while in midair, you lose any upwards momentum and you drop to the ground. This is not a good thing under any circumstance. This is bad. Really bad. And also potentially dangerous to your campaign to purge the world of evil or something to that extent. The Krion Conquest comprises 4 rounds with 3 stages apiece, concluding with a final boss stage. You start with 3 lives and seldom few chances to regain more along the way. When you lose a life, you restart at the beginning of the stage you're in, and if you lose all your lives, it's game over. There are no continues, no passwords, no save feature of any kind. You get 3 lives and that's all there is to it. And Krion Conquest, with all its control and collision detection hiccups, is a trying game indeed. And the really sad thing is all this pain wasn't originally part of the package. Over in Japan, the Krion Conquest was known as Magical Dorapi or Dorapi or whatever. And while the gameplay was largely the same, it had a few extra bits like cutscenes, stage intermissions, and continues even. Not only that, but if you died at a boss fight, you restarted at the boss fight. Not so in a localized Krion Conquest where if you died at a boss, you restarted at the previous stage. Why the game removed continues and boss fight checkpoints is a question best answered by people smarter than I. But in fairness, it probably wouldn't have mattered much to begin with. Even if you had continues, you still had some rather unpolished gameplay to work with, and no amount of slick title screens or cutscenes was going to hide that reality. So the Krion Conquest was inspired by the Mega Man series, and it's hard not to notice that from the visual style of the game. Your main protagonist, animated somewhat like Mega Man, you have enemy designs which resemble that of Mega Man's Rogues Gallery, and you have a similar looking panel that slightly resembles the Dr. Wily panels of sorts. It does come across as blatant, but if I could give them some credit, at least it looks alright. The characters have some detail to them, there's some flickering, but no more than that of a typical Mega Man title on the NES. The level aesthetics and design would fit in nicely with any of Capcom's titles. Some of the larger bosses are quite impressive looking for the most part. I'm not gonna lie, the game looks alright, and I'm okay with that. One aspect of Mega Man that Krion Conquest does not take inspiration from is the sound quality, though to be fair, you're talking about a series of NES games that's known for its solid sound design and top-notch chip music, and while Dorapai doesn't quite reach that level of quality, some of the sound effects are quite irritating. It's not too bad. The music is... It's average. I've heard worse. But it's not all terrible, I guess. I'm probably giving them too much credit, but I've heard worse. Let's just leave it at that. The Krion Conquest is an unpolished mega clone that would have been written off as merely uninspired and unoriginal if it weren't marred by a number of issues that keep the game from being decent. One could argue that Krion is a lesser game due to the number of elements removed from this version, but I would argue that even if Magical Dorapai made the local transition unaltered, it still would have been less than stellar experience due to the wonky play control, questionable collision and hit detection, and the uneven difficulty brought about by a rather unreliable flying broom. And it's too bad, because if there was that little bit more polish in the controls and some other minor bits, it would have been a serviceable, yet unremarkable little side-scroller that might have been remembered slightly more fondly. As a whole, the Krion Conquest on the NES doesn't quite hold up and might not be everyone's cup of tea. But if this game suits your fancy due to its fifth-rate Mega Man-esque gameplay, or you just want another magical girl-themed platforming game, I'd suggest going for the original Famicom version instead. The presentation's a bit better, you have continues after game overs and restart at boss fights if you fail, which makes the game a little more tolerable, and there's also an actual ending, so that's something. You'll never replace me!